Welcome to the Polygamer podcast, where gaming is for everyone. Join us as we expand the boundaries of the gaming community.
I'm your host, Ken Gagnon, on this week's Polygamer.
But when I sort of shot a portal one way and then I sort of looked at myself and I was like, oh my god, I'm a girl! And she's kind of brown? And that's awesome?
That's Elisa Meléndez, also known on Twitter as Elisa Rockdock. Last month at PAX East, I was in the audience for a panel on which she participated, and I immediately knew that this was somebody I want to talk to further. I approached her after the show, gave her my card, and the result is what you are about to hear. This episode is a bit longer than usual episodes of Polygamer, and by a bit I mean twice as much, 2 hours long, OMG. I entirely blame myself because there were so many fascinating topics I wanted to talk to Elisa about that I couldn't choose just a few, so we went all in and discussed everything I had on my agenda. Even then, I still cut about a half an hour of content out to try to keep it slightly more manageable. I hope you nonetheless find the 2 hours of content as riveting as I do, but regardless, rest assured that this does not indicate a new pattern for the future of Polygamer. I do try to keep my episodes to about an hour, and I will try to be more reserved in future episodes. Before we get to the interview, some news from the world of equality and diversity. I just got back from a weekend in New York City where I attended Different Games, the 3rd annual convention on diversity and inclusivity in games. The event began Friday evening and ran all day Saturday with a variety of panels, tracks, sessions, and speeches on academic and educational topics in gaming. Although several of the talks were excellent, the real draw for me was meeting all the fascinating people who were also in attendance. It should come as no surprise to you that just as I was at PAX, I was scouting for potential guests for this show, and boy, did I find them in spades. I am so much hoping that in future episodes of this show, I can speak with the likes of Kara Stone, Ashley Alicia, Jennifer Alloway, Francesca Carletto-Leon, and more. I also finally had the privilege to meet Sean Alexander Allen, who was on Polygamer number 3, back when the show still had a video edition. Sean and I stared at each other over webcams for an hour last August, and finally got to meet at Different Games this past weekend. I also very much enjoyed the tweet from a GamerGater accusing me of associating with the enemy, specifically with a hate movement. I was tempted to tweet back and invite him to join us at Different Games and engage in dialogue, but that didn't seem to be his MO. However, I am glad to be back home. I am not native to New York City, and although Boston is a fairly large city that I am quite comfortable navigating, New York City is just on an entirely different level. I always surprise myself when I'm able to get onto the correct subway and get off at the right stop. The memento I have from that trip, besides all the wonderful people I met, is a cold, the nasal projection of which you may hear in this prologue. Rest assured, I was feeling much better when I interviewed Elisa, and I hope to be well again soon. Going to cons can be expensive, and I very much appreciate that I was able to offset some of those costs by staying with a friend. Thank you to Mr. Ivan Drucker of Ivan Expert, a Mac consulting firm in New York City. For all your Apple needs in the Big Apple, go to ivanexpert.com. Putting on a podcast also has its own expenses, and I encourage you to assist a fellow diversity podcaster in offsetting some of the cost of hers. Aline Sims of Less Than or Equal, a podcast I was on back in November, just launched her own Patreon. You can find that at patreon.com/Aleen, A-L-E-E-N, full disclosure. I am a backer. So with little additional ado, I give you this week's episode of Polygamer. You can, of course, find show notes to all the resources referenced in this episode at polygamer.net, where you can also find all our previous episodes, send feedback, either written or voicemail, and also find a link to our listing in the iTunes store, where I would very much appreciate if you left a review to let us know what you like about the show and help other people find it. My thanks again to Elisa for being so generous with her time. Here she is. Today I'm so excited to be speaking with Elisa Meléndez, author, musician, academic, and so many more that I hope to cover in this next hour. Hello.
Hi!
How are you?
I am great. I'm so happy to be here. This is awesome.
I am so happy that you're in Florida and not in Boston.
It does have its charms. It does.
And to be clear, I'm happy for you, but although I was very happy when you were here in Boston at PAX East, which is where we crossed paths.
Yes.
Now, that wasn't your first PAX East, was it?
No. Gosh, I can't even remember how many PAX Easts I've done. I started, I want to say in maybe 2010, and I might have skipped a year, but I've been going to quite a few of them.
Because I feel like I'm sure I've seen you speak on other panels, right?
Yes. I basically just kind of try to shove myself onto panels when and where I can. If anybody needs anybody to talk about gender issues or academia in games, I'm usually your girl.
And one of the reasons for that is because you are currently a PhD candidate in comparative sociology with a research focus on video games. Is that correct?
Yes. Quite specifically, I'm looking at intersections of gender and authenticity, and looking at those through the lens of Rock Band and Rocksmith.
How did you come upon such a niche topic? I mean, most people, they go to get a degree. I know they have to write a very specific dissertation, but most people in the video game industry, they want to be programmers or community managers or developers, and you specifically want to be an academic in the game market. That is unusual.
Yeah, it is unusual. And granted, I don't necessarily envision myself as being a career academic in the traditional sense. I'm more just a nerd that kind of wanted to be I wanted to have an excuse to be in school forever and study the things that I love. And it's like, oh, you can get a PhD and you can study stuff that you want. That's kind of cool. And that means that I can buy fresh textbooks and have that fresh notebook smell and pick out my favorite pens and things. Sure, yeah, let's do that for a bajillion years. But I started off as I've always been a gamer and I've always been a musician since I could, pick up a microphone, or, I sort of joke that I learned to read using Nintendo Power. And that's always kind of followed me. So when I entered into undergrad, I became a women's studies major, and one of my final projects as a senior in a sociology of men class, which is a fun conversation in and of itself, I basically followed around a local rock band and looked at the links between gender and rock music. That carried over into my first master's degree, which I got, by the by, at Lesley University in Cambridge.
Hey, that's just down the road here.
Exactly. Yes.
You're the second guest on this show to have gotten a master's degree at Lesley University.
No way!
A former guest, Khadija Marenkov, did an ethnography of the Boston indie gaming scene for her master's degree.
What? That's ridiculous.
Toast.
Yes. Okay, cool. So Lesley University was awesome. It was a really great cohort of people that were just all really supportive. And one of the main things that I got out of that is people telling me that, your research, your voice, your perspective is valuable, and it's not about the sort of new hot thing that people are researching. It's, what is meaningful to you, and that's something that I really love getting out of that. And so I did a thesis just looking on gender and rock music. And the project itself was basically developing a full semester women in popular music course. So it was sort of like an education thing, but also a gender studies thing. And then I realized that if I wanted to do not anything worth consequence, but I realized that if I wanted to basically teach at the university level, and that was kind of where my mind was heading, I was like, well, gotta go for the PhD, because a master's in interdisciplinary studies might not necessarily cut it. In my first year, I took that research with me, but I felt like there was something missing. And usually when you get a PhD, you're kind of stuck with your area of study for years, the better part of a decade sometimes. And so if you're not doing something that you love, it could get pretty bleak pretty fast. So I went to my advisor and I said, I really like these last 2 years of research that I did in women in rock music, and that's still very, very relevant to me, but I sort of rediscovered my love of gaming in my undergraduate years, and I said, I'm seeing this sort of emerging thing happening, and I'm seeing so many parallels between the rock music industry and gaming, but I don't want to abandon the 2 years of research I already did. I was like, I don't want to throw all this out, but I want to do something new. What do I do? And then he basically said, aren't there music games? And I said, oh, you're a genius.
Just like that.
Just like that. So that way I didn't have to abandon all of the research that I did over the last 2 years, but I could still look into the field of study that I actually wanted to look into. And that's kind of how it happened, and I haven't been the same since.
You said you don't want to be a career academic, so what do you want to do with this degree?
Gosh, I don't know. All sorts of things. I sort of envision myself as, and someone kind of jokingly referred to me as an Indiana Jones type, where I would be sort of teaching as a sort of day job, but then I would actually go into the field and maybe either do some sort of consulting or do some sort of research, or do things that would make me more embedded within the actual gaming industry itself. So they're like, yeah, you're like Indiana Jones. You like go to all these conventions and stuff, and then you come back and then you actually like teach us things. And it's like, well, that's kind of cool. I dig that. I can live with that. So I'm kind of a weird person in the sense that I still don't necessarily know what I want to be when I grow up. I look at the tracks that my colleagues have taken and doing the whole like publish or perish thing where they do the peer-reviewed articles, and it's a lot of navel-gazing and some preaching to the choir with some intermittent, flashes of fresh theory, and I see my professors go through the whole tenure process and trying to create these giant binders of teaching and continuing research and publishing, and I'm going, I don't know if that's necessarily the thing that I want to do. I love speaking to players. I love speaking to other colleagues in my field. I love teaching my students, and kind of getting them while they're young, thinking about all sorts of social issues in the media that they consume. So in any universe where I can do that, in the last couple of years, I sort of dipped my toe into the journalism side of things, even though I don't necessarily know that I would call what I do journalism, so much as slight critique, I guess. And I kind of like that. And I also dabbled in the sort of forward-facing industry side of things as a FragDoll cadet and kind of working as part of like a marketing promotion side of things, and I also enjoyed that too. So I'm trying to make my way. If you need somebody who is kind of feels like she's on stage all the time, dropping a bit of knowledge with a little dose of humor and a dash of red dye number 2, then that's the place that I feel most comfortable in, whatever place that ends up being.
Being on stage all the time sounds exhausting.
It is exhausting. And it's great. Although I do appreciate, and it's kind of happened more as I've gotten older, I think. I appreciate moments where I can just kind of go catatonic and just completely stare off into space and not say anything for a few hours and just kind of dive into the entire internet and not speak a word. And those moments are nice. Those moments when I'm just sort of like sitting with my husband and we're playing Minecraft and we're listening to music and we're enjoying a comfortable silence while we're mining things together. It's nice. Because I enjoy those moments.
I appreciate that that's not the Elisa that showed up for this podcast.
Oh God, no. Yeah, no, that would not for a fun podcast make. Unless it was, in Minecraft somewhat, then that might work.
We can talk. Maybe we'll do that too. You said you rediscovered your love for gaming in your undergraduate years. Was there a time when you had fallen out of love with games?
So not necessarily fallen out of love so much as not followed it as closely. So we were a Nintendo household. Growing up, we had the NES. I think my brother is 6 years my senior, and so he pretty much taught me a lot of to love a lot of the things that I currently love. I think before I was born, I think they enjoyed either Atari or ColecoVision, not sure which. But when I was around, we were a Nintendo household. But for some reason, we sort of stopped at the SNES, and we didn't pick up another console until we moved here, and my brother got his first PlayStation. And there was a sort of lull after that because it wasn't necessarily like the family console. It was more like in his room, in his universe at that point. So that's when I started, there were sort of board game nights, and every once in a while I would sort of look at, whatever my brother was playing, but it wasn't as thrilling to me necessarily. So I almost felt like I was in a sort of bit of like arrested development in my gaming career. So basically I was just sort of stuck with I was happy with it, but I was stuck with my SNES and my NES forever. And I got a PC, and this was, I think I had just started in my undergraduate career. So I got a PC, and I did kind of want to play some games, and I heard about a game called The Sims, and that was kind of cool. And I always had a love of sort of fantasy and role-playing and stuff, and so I picked up a game. I have no idea how I even figured that this game out existed. But it was Neverwinter Nights, and I sort of fell in love with that, and that was kind of cool. And then my best friend said, there's this game. If you like that sort of a game where you're like a wizard and you're shooting magic with stuff, there's this other game that I started playing that was really cool called World of Warcraft.
Oh dear.
And I told myself that I would get that as an undergraduate graduation present, because if not, I would probably never graduate. And sure enough, I don't know, it was sometime after that, and I think it was more sort of like being able to move out of my house and make my own decisions with my own disposable income. That basically then meant that I could play what I want, do what I want, make my own investigations about stuff, and then that's kind of how I sort of fell back into it, which is kind of cool. And I've never been the same since.
So we crossed paths at PAX East 2015 when you were on a panel all about our virtual selves. Can you give me a brief summary of what that was about?
Yes. So it featured Neha Nirwari, Alexa Ray Correa, Mitch Dyer, and Mike Laidlaw, who is the creative director of Dragon Age, and I tried to conceal my fangirl squee the entire time. I hope I did okay. But basically we were talking about why it is, in particular in sort of fantasy realms, and especially in situations where you can create your own character, why it is that we choose to play the avatars that we do, and how closely do we think of ourselves as being attached to our avatars? Are these just pawns in a game that we're playing, or do we necessarily think of ourselves as sort of being that character, and to what extent do we think of ourselves as that character? And what kind of decisions do we make in the character creation process, and why? So just sort of kind of starting to kick off that conversation, and I brought some academic research to the table for that, as well as some fun, amusing character type anecdotes. It was mostly on the sort of create your own character side of things, but then we also talked about sort of kind of already designed, authored characters, and how easy it is, or how hard it is, to identify with certain characters over others. But yeah.
So when creating our own characters, did you come to any conclusions about, do men tend to play as men and women play as women, or do we create characters that look like us?
We tend to, or at the very least in sort of my research, because that's part of one of the things that I'm looking at in my own research into Rock Band, especially because you do have a character creator there. When I asked people in interviews, about a third of them said that their characters that they create as rock stars are idealized versions of themselves. So there were a lot of answers that were, like me, but with spiky hair, or like me, but with cooler clothes. So there was a lot of that popping up in the research. And a lot of times, when you're creating a character, you tend to at least it sort of shakes out in a lot of the research, you tend to create some sort of reasonable facsimile to yourself, or you take the opportunity to become either significantly more. Usually people tend to want to shoot for more attractive and create more attractive avatars, conventionally attractive, I guess that is. But for the most part, there's a decent amount of players that will outwardly set out to create something that's as close to themselves as possible so that they feel a tighter connection with the avatar on the screen.
But if video games are a form of escapism, why would we want to continue being the same person we are day to day, albeit with minor changes?
That's a good question. I want to say it has something with the idea of having some sort of control over the world that you're in, some sort of agency, and it sort of feels like it has a little bit more oomph if you can directly identify with the character. Although people do tend to create some sort of semblance of themselves, usually when given the chance, a lot of times it's more of a heroic version. Nobody's making an exact copy of themselves. Well, not no one, but people aren't usually making exact copies of themselves. More like them, but more buff, or them, but an elf, or them, but either skinnier or taller or with cooler clothing, or sort of some sort of kind of augmented thing. Now, that's not to say that that's always the case. In fact, in one of my colleagues, I have a colleague who's basically the first one in my department to study video games at a grand scale, and she's looking at gender issues in World of Warcraft in particular, and she found that a significant amount of female players, while she was doing her research, would actively create female orcs, basically female orcs or female tauren, which were usually seen as the least attractive sort of members of all of the races available to them, specifically to avoid being pegged as, oh, you're a girl playing World of Warcraft. And so, there are all sorts of different reasons that people choose the characters that they do. But there's a lot of research out there that basically looks at the idea that even if it doesn't necessarily look like us, based on time spent with them and investment, especially in a character creation process, we tend to closely link ourselves with our character. I will find, just in casual conversation, more people referring to themselves as I do this in the game, I do that in the game. Very few people say, well, when I'm playing, Borderlands, my Siren character does XYZ, or even Maya or Lilith does XYZ. It's always, I do this, I do that. So it's that added sense of control with the avatar that I think makes us so tightly linked with that experience.
Does it matter if in the game we can see ourselves? For example, I was playing Destiny, which had a limited character creator, and the character I created looked more like Mr. Freeze, which is not how I see myself.
That's cool, though.
It is cool, and it's a first-person shooter, so I never had to look at my face.
Yeah. It's weird, because I created a character in Destiny that looked at, I don't know, it's weird. She had the same asymmetrical haircut, and I could dye it all red, and I could give her bright red lipstick. And I was like, oh my god, this is awesome. And my husband created somebody that had long brown hair, and I think was able to give him a goatee. And we were both freaking out. I think I have there's a picture of our both screens going, oh my gosh, I can't believe that we're actually going to do this and play as ourselves in Destiny. That's funny. But even though you're completely covered up, it's a first-person shooter. Like, I still know what I look like, Like, I still know what I look like, and I still know that I look cool. And at the very least, when we're in the tower, we don't have helmets on, I can somehow see myself. Like, I know what I look like, and that's all that matters. I don't know. I haven't done sort of as much research on that on that particular area. But I think that if you can somehow see what you look like or have a way to be able to see yourself, I think that closely ties you to that character, probably in a different way than, say, in a maybe Portal type scenario, right? Which is kind of part of that aha moment that happens, where the only way that maybe you would be able to see yourself is if you sort of place the portals just right, and then you can actually see who you are. And that was kind of a significant moment for me, because I was, when I play a game and I don't know who I am, then I'm like, well, probably a white dude saving the universe again. Do, let's do this. I've been used to identifying with, a gruffy white dude since the dawn of time, or, a plumber. So, but when I sort of like shot a portal one way, and then I sort of like looked at myself and I was like, oh my God, I'm a girl. And she's kind of brown. And that's awesome. And then that completely changed the way that I interacted with the game. That completely changed the way that I felt about the story. Now it wasn't that I wanted to finish the game or beat the game because I just want to finish games, but it was more like, I want to get out of here. Not this person, but I want to get out of here. I want to defeat this person. Let's freaking do this. And it was so much more enjoyable, being able to not only see what I look like, but see that, hey, we might share the same shade of foundation, and that's kind of cool. I don't know.
Speaking of playing as white dudes through all these games, there are a lot of them at PAX East. You said that if it weren't for you, there would be some panels that were just completely white dudes.
Yeah, I often find that not just in some panels at PAX East. Granted, the identifying with our virtual selves panel was awesome and beautiful and excellently diverse, and that was pretty sweet. And I find that sometimes, at least in sort of like my early days of being on panels in places like MagFest, the Music and Gaming Festival, there would be some panels that would talk about things like, gosh, like diversity in games or politics in games. And I would say, so you're talking about this stuff and you're a bunch of white dudes. And I'm sure you have a bunch of wonderful things to say. I'm sure you're great and you've done an immense amount of research, but there are some voices that need to be heard, and I don't think you're necessarily going to be able to speak to that stuff the way that, maybe I necessarily could. And I think just like the optics of that, the sort of visuals of that, of saying, all right, cool, diversity in games, or women in games, or even a recent panel I was on, it was listed as a Globber Glorp panel, as a hashtag that shall not be named panel.
Gotcha.
But it was changed to just in general toxic gaming communities, I think, or toxic communities in gaming or something like that. I realized that you were going to have a panel about a hashtag that was started to specifically attack a woman on a completely baseless, sexist basis, and you were going to have a woman on it. And I said, screw it, I'll bite the bullet. I will be on that panel, because it would kind of look bad. And I'm sure that, and I know for a fact that the panelists had great things to add, but you need those other voices, and part of making significant change in the industry is, actually having those voices heard in their own special way. And so, yeah, I'll be the brown girl to jump up on a panel and create the diversity on the diversity in games panel, because good gravy. Otherwise, what the heck are we doing?
One of the challenges I found in assembling panels for these events is that the convention itself and the panel moderators, such as myself, don't offer a budget to bring speakers in for these panels.
Ooh. Yeah.
So, for example, I pitched a panel about YouTube Let's Players for this year's PAX East, and I reached out to several women in the community who all do great Let's Plays, and none of them already had plans to go to PAX East, and I had no incentive to get them to come.
Mm-hmm.
So it was really hard for me to put together a panel that had that kind of diversity.
Yeah, and class is a huge issue. Accessibility is a huge issue. The people that tend to be on these panels are people that have the economic means with which to get there and have the ability to, take time off work or have these kinds of panels and, potentially extracurricular activities depending on what jobs these folks might occupy being taken seriously, right? So, even in a current situation, you might be working a job and you might say, oh, I want to go to XYZ to speak on these issues and I'm kind of an important voice that needs to be there. And then your job might be like, I don't care. You have to be here. Or, it doesn't matter. Or what's that? Or you don't have the time. Or you just don't have the wherewithal to be able to do the hotel, flight, badge, whole 9 yards thing. So that definitely leads to a lot of sort of a lot of the same faces popping up, which is unfortunate. But thankfully, at least I ended up doing it with relative success, and some other folks have achieved some relative success using crowdfunding type stuff. But I really think that there should be better options in order to get those marginalized voices out there, because marginalization is not just along gender or racial lines, it's also class, and that's kind of something that ends up getting swept under the rug a lot.
So how do we fix that? Where do we get this budget? I mean, you mentioned crowdfunding, and I believe AlterConf is doing a good job of offering some sort of a stipend to its speakers, but for bigger events like PAX, where it's attended by 80,000 people, I don't know what it costs PAX to put on that event, and I know that they have a staff they need to pay, but if you do some back-of-the-envelope calculations where they're selling badges for $45 a day, 3 days for 80,000 people, that's almost $11 million in ticket sales alone.
Woof!
You think maybe they could budget some of that for speakers?
That'd be nice. That'd be nice. I don't know. Beyond, maybe sort of. I think it would probably need to be enough people kind of poking the bear and saying, hey, if you want to be an awesome person and you say you're an awesome person and you have something like a diversity lounge and the Take This lounge, which are kind of cool, and you're supporting, indies and poke, then, there might be another really cool way for you to do that. Wink, wink, nudge. I don't know. I don't know what it would take in order to make that happen.
Speaking of the Diversity Lounge, when it was first announced a year or two ago, the reactions ranged from enthusiasm to skepticism to optimism. Some people were concerned about PAX just shoving all the diversity into a single room so we don't have to think about it at the rest of the convention. You found yourself pleasantly surprised by the Diversity Lounge at PAX East 2014. Now that the room has had a year or two to grow, what's your opinion of it?
I like it. I like what it at the very least, I like what it did for me. It sort of gave me a space to sit, and I basically just kind of spent my time there at a table playing a tabletop game with my two friends, just talking with people, and the vibe there was just nice and relaxed, and there were good conversations happening. I don't necessarily know how much of it is sort of a safe space for us, how much of it is a place for folks that might potentially want to bill themselves as allies to get more education on issues. I don't necessarily know how much of that is going on. Part of me did say, why can't it not be more visible? Why can't we have, the booth like on the main floor? But then I realized the main floor is loud. I mean, granted, it wasn't as loud this year because so many giant names that are usually there weren't there this year. But, you know, when you are being bombarded with the you know, Shoot Face McGee, The Reckoning, you know, like all in your face all the time, you know, that might not necessarily be the best spot to have, you know, a nice, gentle conversation about why we need more diverse games. So I kind of understand the idea of it. It would be kind of cool if maybe there was also a space for diverse creators of games. You know, like if the Diversity Lounge had like a diversity, you know, like mega booth or mini booth or something on the floor to actually showcase some of those really, really cool products. You know, the indie mega booth and the indie mini booth, I think, you know, do that, but it's not, you know, necessarily, you know, dedicated to those particular issues. It would be kind of cool if they, you know, if they could all be kind of like lumped together as well to be like, hey, you know, not only are we talking about these issues upstairs, but here's a chance to play some examples of the things that we're talking about made by some of the people that we're talking about. I think that would be a really cool addition to it. And I think the lounge, in addition to the Take This lounge, I think represent a really good move. I want to see what ends up happening in subsequent years. I don't know what kind of the sort of end goal is, if it's a, you know, safe space for those folks to kind of tuck in, or if it's a place that is going to be strictly endorsing education for those people that might need it, if it's a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B. But we'll see where it goes. But at least, you know, when I was there the first couple of years, I was happy to see it there, and I was happy to just have a place where I could just go in there, look, and immediately say, okay, these are my people. In a place where you might not, you know, where you might be kind of looking around and kind of wondering, you know.
Every now and then I'll see somebody online making the comment, not necessarily a complaint, just a comment that PAX is getting very touchy-feely. And why do you make that sound?
PAX is getting touchy-feely.
What's wrong with that? It's a good thing for it to be touchy-feely, right?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's why I make that noise. Like, PAX is getting super touchy-feely. I'm like, well, maybe, you know, a hug is nice.
Aww.
Now and then. And games make me feel good. And games make me think. And games make me smile. And hanging out and talking to people that like the same things I do and can introduce me to things that I might like in the future. Like, all of that is awesome. Like, why are you going to say that PAX is touchy-feely when PAX is getting touchy-feely when one of the, I think, like, first signs I ever saw at a PAX said, "Welcome home."
Aww.
Like, how are you going to complain? Like, that's the environment that we're trying to convey. Like, these are your people. You know, we are all coming to, you know, we're coming home. This is our universe. You know, this is a representation of what we do, what we love, you know, allegedly, you know, like the coolest parts, you know, of what we do, and you can come meet like-minded folks, and maybe you're from an area that doesn't have, you know, tournaments or LAN parties or whatever. These, you know, this is the place where you can hang out with those people. Don't complain that it's touchy-feely. Why are you there?
It's becoming more inclusive, and that's a good thing.
It is!
Yay. Although I will offer the caveat that if you are going to hug somebody at PAX, ask first.
Of course.
Of course.
Of course. Always.
So speaking of conventions, you used to be a FragDoll cadet, is that correct?
Yes.
And for those unfamiliar with FragDolls, what are they?
Okay, so the FragDolls are a team of professional female gamers, and they are sort of kind of sponsored, associated with Ubisoft. And they started off at a sort of competitive level, doing really cool things, like competing in Rainbow Six. And they sort of represent Ubisoft at shows, and then also do live streams and do really cool stuff with the community, produce video content, blogs, and everything. So just basically, you know, a kind of like sort of celebration of women in the industry. And a few years after they were established, they started this FragDoll Cadet program, which was meant to serve as almost kind of like an internship for young women in games, or young women that were interested in potentially having a career in the video game industry. And it gave us a way to kind of stick our foot in the door and experience what things are like kind of from the industry end of things, and then potentially network and develop those contacts so that if we wanted to sort of venture into the game industry in the future, once we got out of school or whatever, that we would have a better sense of what that would be like, and we would have some of those connections. And I was part of I want to say I started in fall 2010 as a FragDoll cadet. And it was usually kind of like a semester-long thing where basically there was a sort of a fall class and then kind of a spring-summer class. And then depending on what class you were in, you would get selected to go to different events and then work at the Ubisoft booth as part of the marketing and promotions team. I started fall 2010 and they kind of kept asking me back, so I kind of kept saying yes. Or rather, I kept demanding. It was like, hey, you need somebody. I'm still here. Hi, please keep hiring me because this is awesome and I love it. So I did that for a few years, and that was really cool. That was kind of part of what took me out from being kind of an exclusively like World of Warcraft RPG person to really kind of expanding my horizons. That in addition to finding Borderlands and playing that with my husband, which is a completely different story. But, like part of being a FragDoll cadet was playing with the community and playing all sorts of different games with the community. And so being a part of that universe kind of exposed me to all sorts of different things that I never would have even considered. Like, I never would have even considered even going to something like PAX unless, until I was hired to work there and I walked in my first PAX Prime in 2010 and I went, wow, this is amazing. This is where all the games live. And this is where all the people that make games and love games go to. This is so cool. And yeah, game changer, life changer. Hard work, very hard work. Some long hours, and thankfully Ubi invested in some comfy, cushy carpet sometimes for those booths. It's a lot of standing, a lot of talking, me, sort of, being on stage all the time, getting people nice and excited over an Assassin's Creed game. But I loved it. That was my wheelhouse.
I see that one of your responsibilities as a FragDoll cadet, according to your profile, was booth work, including drawing customer attention to booths. Do people conflate FragDolls with booth babes, whatever those are?
Well, the sort of way that that the FragDolls set out to basically make themselves apart from what you would kind of quote unquote classically call a booth babe, or a sort of like marketing and promotions model would be the sort of better phrase that I would use, was that we were quote unquote real gamers, and you talk to us and you get information about the game. Like, we know the game. We've played it. We have studied it extensively. We have had communications with the people that actually developed the thing. We've had a chance to play the thing. We can actually demo the thing for you, with you, etc. We know the lingo, right? That was kind of one of the sort of basic separations. It's a shame that, I mean, not to, I don't ever place the blame on the actual women that are working for a living as marketing and promotions models, but it's kind of the thing that set us apart is that we weren't necessarily there to look pretty. It was not just, hey, here's Assassin's Creed flyer. It was, hey, this is Assassin's Creed Black Flag or 3 or whichever. This is Just Dance. This is Rocksmith. This game is awesome. Let me tell you why. And these are all of the myriad reasons why I think this game would be really, really cool for you. This is how it relates to other games that you might have played before. That was kind of the sort of signature moves of the FragDolls and the FragDoll Cadet program. is that, one of the things that we had to do was, show off our gaming history and show off our gaming knowledge as a part of it. That was kind of our vibe. And the reason that, that the cadet program was in place in general was to get young women's foot in the door of the industry in order to perhaps produce more women as employees within the industry, because a lot of our sort of diversity issues, and especially in things like gaming representation and gaming marketing, one of the sort of solutions that is put up there is to get more women working in the industry proper, having that diversity of the actual people making the stuff so that the stuff that gets made is better, and then seeing more women showing off games that they have actually worked on will hopefully, make it so that you don't see a woman at a booth and then automatically assume, well, she doesn't know what she's talking about. She's just a hired gun made to look pretty. Like, no, and especially because of things like booth babe policies nowadays too. The idea is that, when you see someone, lady, gent, whomever, at a booth, that they are there because they're there to have some sort of knowledge of the thing that they are, basically selling you. And that was kind of our vibe there as FragDoll cadets.
So what would you say was the most positive thing you got out of your experience with the FragDoll cadets? They were supposed to help you make connections and get into the industry. Would you say that they were successful in that?
Well, yeah, actually. In not necessarily the traditional way that a lot of my FragDoll cadets, my FragDoll cadet sisters were able to get jobs in the industry. I have quite a few of them, that became like community managers, producers, went into programming, all sorts of cool stuff. So they've gone in and done the thing and have been awesome. I ended up picking up research subjects and doing research. So I was basically only focusing on Rock Band at the moment as part of my dissertation. And then as I think it was like fall 2011, they basically give us this list of games that are, that we're going to be showing off at PAX Prime, and they say, hey, by the way, there's this game that's coming out called Rocksmith that, you can plug in a real guitar and actually learn how to play guitar. And I said, if you don't put me on that game, I will riot. Basically. I was like, hello, look at me. I got music notes tattooed on me. Like, seriously, put me on Rocksmith. Come on. So they did. And thankfully. And I ended up meeting and hanging out with those guys and really getting to know that game. And that game sort of eventually got folded into my dissertation research. And it was really cool because the cool thing about it is that in the dissertation as it shakes out, Rocksmith represents the sort of next most successful version of the next step of the evolution of music games, where it's, this isn't just a simulation of what it's like to be a rock star. This is a simulation, but it also lets you learn to play the instrument so that you too could be the rock star eventually. And I got some, really, basically by kind of hounding these people as an academic and wanting to get interviews and just kind of, doing research, participant observation, being a part of their world for a few years, like that was kind of like my crowning achievements because, being a musician, it was nice because, they're like, hey, we need somebody to work a Rocksmith booth, but these guitars at the Rocksmith booth are going to need their string changed. Do we know anybody that can do that? It's like, well, Elisa can do that because she knows how to change a string because, I've done it, for decades. So that was kind of cool. And eventually what ended up happening was kind of on a lark, I was only like 20% joking. I told the guys, hey, it would be really cool, if one of my songs could end up in the game, because I've been like all up in your steez forever. The people that track the songs and basically translate songs from the master recording to the guitar part, the way that you see it laid out in game, usually some of those folks had bands, and then their band songs would end up on disc as sort of like unlockable songs. And I said, wouldn't that be funny, if my band ended up in the game? Because, I've been, in the trenches showing this game off to people all the time, ha 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 ha, joke, joke, joke. Give me a CD though. I said, okay, sure. So I gave him a CD, and then, a few months later, turns out that, my band Crimson's song Don't Stop ends up in Rocksmith 2014 as
No shit, seriously?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
It's one of the coolest things that has ever happened in my entire life. And
wow.
And that was kind of one of those things where I said, it would be cool if one day somehow, I don't know, like either as a voice actress or as a consultant or as a community marketing person or a writer or something, it would be really cool to have my name in the credits one day. I saw a lot of my colleagues eventually, work at places like 2K and Microsoft and, all sorts of stuff. I see their names in the credits. I said, man, that would be so cool if that could be me one day. And then sure enough, I made it.
You've arrived.
Top of the world.
Yay. Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah. So I would say that being a FragDoll cadet got me some cool stuff.
I would say so. Yeah, wow.
Yeah, and it was a great experience too, just like being, just being around other women, and like even something as small as having a built-in group of women to like play Halo with or to play Blur with. By the way, I miss Blur so much. I want that game to come back so bad. But just having a built-in community of women to just be able to play with, and then know that even if you play online with random people, like if you have a dude mouthing off to you, then you have this group of like 5 other women just completely dogpiling him in the chat. Like that's just so cool to have, and it made me a more confident gamer because I knew that I had this group that would sort of back me up if anything, would happen online. It's kind of cool to have that support system, I think.
Wow, it sounds like it got you a lot of attention with all the right people.
It's what you make it. It's the experience is what you make of it too. Like I could have, very easily envisioned a universe where like I did my time, I worked the booth, I showed people some game stuff, it was cool, come home to Miami, and then, just play games forever, and then that's it, not necessarily do much with it. It's a lot of what you make it, some people are like, hey, it's cool, you get to go to events, like they see that and they see the, they get you to events, and that's awesome. Like, yeah, okay, that's cool. That's one way to sort of look at it. If you, want to make the contacts and you want to, see what it's like, see some amount of what goes into the media that you consume, that's another way to play it too,
Another thing that got you a lot of attention was a year into your time with the FragDolls, you were spotlighted, but you were on the Xbox Gamer Spotlight.
Oh, yes.
What sort of attention did that get you?
Okay, so I had someone that I knew that basically approached me and said, hey, we like to highlight some people that are doing kind of cool and interesting things as gamers. And they thought that my dissertation research was cool. And I don't know, I think it's okay. And they wanted to sort of highlight me for that reason. It's like, oh, here's somebody that's actually studying video games. Let's highlight them on the Gamer Spotlight. And talk about identifying with your avatar. One of the things that happens in the Xbox Gamer Spotlight is that it shows your gamer tag and it shows your avatar, and I made my avatar to look like me, and she was wearing a dress and boots and glasses and had red hair, and I even paid some Microsoft points, not many, but some, to get a black cat facsimile that would sort of like follow me around sometimes, modeled after my own kitty, and that's what people saw. They basically saw me when they saw the Xbox Live Gamer Spotlight, and and under my profile it says that I'm studying gender in video games. Or gender and rock music video games, and then I also had a band, right? And that's it. right? That's basically all you see. And then on the I answer a couple of questions. There was like a little interview where I answered a couple of questions, and some of my answers were up there. I found out that I was a part of the Xbox Live Gamer Spotlight because I woke up, I signed in, and it said that I had 99 new messages. And it was like that consistently for the whole week that I was part of the Xbox Live Gamer Spotlight.
Well, weren't you popular?
Well, well, it's one thing to be featured, and then it's another thing to be, like a featured lady. So in my kind of, I don't know how this happened, but like my sociology academic brain just kind of kicked in and said, wow, rather than delete all of these messages, let's see what's actually coming out. Let's see what people are actually sending me. So one of the things as part of the Xbox Live profile or the Spotlight thing, I think, is like, say hi. And so I got a lot of messages that said simply, hi, or hello. And that was cool.
That's friendly.
And he's like, okay, cool, nice and friendly. So I decided, and this is, me not knowing what I was doing, I just basically grabbed my camera and literally took pictures of the television. I decided to chronicle every response that wasn't a hi or a hello, just to see what would come out, like, statistically. And so there was, like, the first category was I believe the first category is something like congratulations and acknowledgement, I think, might be the sort of tentative name for that category, where it's basically people going, did you know that you're on the Spotlight? Or, hey, you're on the Spotlight. Or, congratulations, you're on the Spotlight. Oh, yes, thank you. Thank you for letting me know. But the second most numerous category was one called Commons and Denigration, and I think that's still the name of the folder that I have all of the images in. Commons and Denigration. So, like, out of, I don't know, I guess maybe like 1,000 messages that I received in that week, I think I ended up with, like, I don't know, a significant amount. How about this? More than I wanted to. A significant amount of just some really, I would say, I took them to be humorous at the time. I had a nice sort of like academic research distance from it, so I was able to kind of laugh at it for a second. Things like, show me your tits, or, can you sit on my face, and you're a slut, and blah, blah, blah. Typical stuff. And I only, which I was kind of surprised, my hypothesis was disproven. I hypothesized that I would get a significant amount of wiener pictures, and I only got 2. I only got 2 in that entire week.
Which is still too many.
Exactly. Which is still clearly too many. But I was like, oh, I thought I'd get more. Okay.
I hope you weren't disappointed.
Yeah, I don't know. It's sort of like that, like, tongue-in-cheek way of looking at it, because a colleague of mine, also a FragDoll cadet, had started the website fatuglyerslutty.com, which was basically chronicling a lot of the harassment that women get online when they, decide to be audacious enough and play video games, and even better, use voice chat and actually speak and show themselves as female avatars and names that might denote some semblance of gender. So just messages upon messages like that. And so I was basically kind of looking at it like, oh, sweet. I'm going to give these people material for days, for weeks, for months. I'm just going to keep... Basically, I just linked them to a Dropbox folder and was like, here, go to town. Post away, my darlings. And then, so some kind of, like, more funny stuff. Like that's the worst... that's the worst PhD I've ever heard of. Or like most useless PhD I ever heard of, which I thought was hilarious. Like you had your classic sandwich making requests and lots of requests for boobs and send me pictures and can you be my Xbox girlfriend, which I'm not entirely sure what that entails. There were some doubts about my gaming prowess. Like, people would look at my achievements list and they would see that I had all these achievements in Borderlands, and it's like, oh, I bet your boyfriend got you all those achievements in Borderlands. And I'm like, what? No. Why? Is that even a thing that you would assume? That's awful. And some very, very creative, very creative and imaginative scenarios of what people would do to my body, both living and as a corpse. So that happened. And I kind of use that as examples. I basically, brought that with me to a lot of sort of subsequent panels and is like, look, like I can laugh at it. And that happened to me for a week. That was all in a week. I'm not someone who, plays a lot of first-person shooters. I don't use the microphone a lot. When I play video games, I don't party up with random people. And, part of that is, part of the reason why is, stuff like that. Like, yeah, I can kind of laugh at it. But then I imagine that opening myself up to that kind of stuff on a regular basis would make me hate games. And as someone who is researching games potentially for a living, that's not a feeling that I want to subject myself to, And it's hard to imagine what other women who, who are more vocal online, obviously we know what happens there. And, I sort of use humor when I'm talking about my own experience, but it kind of opens the door to the sort of less humorous look of, what happens when, this kind of stuff ends up happening to someone over a targeted period of months, sometimes years. Then there's a reason why so many women don't find themselves at PAX and why so many women don't find themselves in the industry. It's death by 1,000 paper cuts, is what it is.
So you approached your spotlight with an analytical mind, and you have 4 additional years of PhD-level education in sociology since then. Has this shed any insight into why the internet hates women?
Well, it's hard to talk about, only because especially in the last, over like 6 months or so, like it's hard and overwhelming to try and talk about it because it's so absurd when you try to think about what you're actually trying to do in the industry and in overall tech industries. It's like we're not taking anything away from you, and some of the stuff that we would like to see end would actually be kind of good for you too. And we like video games, and some of us play Call of Duty, and I really enjoyed Titanfall, and like we're not, a significant amount of us, some of us, just want to like tear down the entire system and start over, which, I don't blame anyone for wanting that approach. I'm more of a sort of like, I like some of the stuff that we have, I just want it to be better. And some of the really cool stuff that we have coming out, I'd like to see more of it. And I would like to see more of you realize why it is that some of this stuff is actually cool, and you're suffering by not having really awesome, diverse games, and why some of these attitudes that are constantly getting perpetuated are as much a prison for you as they are for us in terms of the social roles that are constantly getting perpetuated. It's hard to kind of think about why. I want to say I'm one of those people that like tries to see the sort of silver lining, if there is one to be found, that the sort of loudness of it is the kind of like death throes of a lot of these attitudes, and that maybe some of the youngsters that are coming up that are already, maybe seeing things in a more sort of diverse way are going to end up kind of replacing these folks eventually when they enter the enjoyment of the gaming industry. I'd like to say that the reason that this is so loud is because there is a difference being made and it's these sort of last sort of dying shrieks from a world that's currently on its way out.
But it's so strange because even when we're not advocating for change in games or for more diverse games, when you're just putting yourself out there as an Xbox gamer spotlight, which really doesn't carry any political connotations as far as I know of, they nonetheless interpret that as a threat and they see you as a target, and that's just so strange.
It is strange, but what I always sort of, especially when we sort of talk about the like politics and gaming thing, like take politics out of my games. And like, I don't want any politics in my games. Clearly, my being there, just by virtue of presenting myself and identifying myself, identifying as a woman and being a part of this world, my presence as a, you know, and then especially, you know, my husband calls me a triple threat as a queer woman of color, like just my existence in these spaces is a political act, right? Which is, you know, kind of like why I like kind of like inserting myself into panels where otherwise it would just be, you know, a bunch of white dudes talking about an issue. Like my presence is in itself a political act, as it is for so many of us. Like yes, I'm not saying, you know, we need diverse games, you know, on my Xbox Live Gamer Spotlight. I'm just a girl that plays stuff. And, you know, some folks just can't stand the fact that their quote-unquote clubhouse, quote-unquote, is getting invaded by girls.
No!
Ew! And not just that, but like, you know, we're also making you think about race issues in games. Oh no! Like, wouldn't it be so uncomfortable to play something like a Call of Duty with a brown person that consistently sees themselves as a target in these games? I'd rather not have them there. I'd rather just have them be convenient targets for me to shoot at in game. Yay! No! So what's happening is, I think is, you know, some, you know, people are getting, their world is changing. People are getting confronted with the potential idea that, you know, I'm sorry, the universe does not actually revolve around you and your needs. You are not the only one that consumes this. Usually, for some folks, saying, wow, look at all these cool different people that are engaging in my hobby that I can talk to now about this thing. Usually that would be a cool thing, right? Like when I see somebody else that's like, you know, I sometimes wear like Xbox button earrings, or like I'll wear like the Zelda boss key around my neck. You know, usually like someone will see that, recognize that, and be like, wow, that's really, really cool, you know, and then that'll start a conversation, and then I get to talk to somebody, and then, hooray! Made a new friend. People don't necessarily see it like that, and tend to identify themselves so tightly with the media that they consume that they feel like that their actual identity is somehow being taken away from them if too many people identify and like the same thing that they like. And that's unfortunate, and that's a shame. These conversations are getting started. You know, the FragDolls were a thing that existed, and they gave me and so many other women the opportunity to you know, stick their feet in the door of the industry, or at the very least, you know, give people, like, I'm weird, and I'm kind of a cockeyed optimist, and unfortunately, you know, there are some people that don't, I don't know, like maybe enjoy my brand of optimism, and that's totally cool. But like, I feel like if I need to keep going, and for me, I need to see some sort of optimism, because if I personally get sort of stuck in the sea of, you know, negativity that I often see so much, especially over like the last 8 months, like I will get, I will, I will lose hope. And I don't want to lose hope. Because there are so many people that have come up to me and, like, hugged me. Good God, hugged me after panels. Thankfully they asked beforehand. But, like, hugged me because they're like, I've thought about this stuff for a while, but I needed somebody else to, like, say it and say it to a room full of people for me, and I feel so much better. Like, I feel like me doing what I do, as long as I can still have somebody, come up to me and say that, as long as, you have this group of girls that are hanging out at the Ubisoft booth and, someone comes up to us and, and maybe says something like, can I talk to somebody that knows about the game? And if we can sort of, like, shut them down and explain to them that not only do we know about the game, but we've actually played it long before you have, and we've done a decent amount of research, and we've played all sorts of games, and we can totally explain this to you. Like, if we can sort of, like, change that, if that can change somebody, if that can make somebody think, like, wow, that was kind of an asshole move on my part. Like, if I can make somebody either rethink their attitudes about stuff, or at the very least, like even I see it sometimes with my own students who play video games, and I will try to, interject video games into my lessons as much as possible, because otherwise, hey, I need to have fun too. But, like, if I can have a student, come up to me and say, hey, I saw this thing about GamerGate, and I read into it, but then now after talking to you and seeing what your opinions are about it, like, I did more research, and, like, now I understand, what you're going through, and it sort of made me see games differently. Like, if I can do that for a high school student, my God, like I want to keep doing what I'm doing, because I feel like, then that person will tell another person, and then maybe if, somebody makes a transphobic joke, makes a homophobic joke, like, maybe that, that's one more person that can spread the word and say, yeah, no, that's not okay, and we need to do better. So I'm hoping that at the very least, I can do my own small part in doing that. If we can't tear the entire thing down and start over, then, I'll do what I can over here to do my small part at hopefully making people not make people better, but at least make people think for, like, half a second about how what they are about to say, or what they do, or what they consume has an impact on people. That's all I want.
I mean, on one hand, that's such a simple thing to ask for, and on the other hand, it's such a huge thing to get, and I appreciate you having the patience and the courage and the endurance
Oh, God.
to ask for these things. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to intimidate you.
No. It's, and it's weird to hear you say that, because, like Zoe, Brianna, Anita, like, they've been, like I haven't had, like, 0.1% the fraction of what they had, but, and that's sort of, like, one thing that I'm trying to, like, get out of too. I went to a great talk with, it was at this past GDC. It was a great talk on online harassment and steps that we can do to curb it. I think it had like Zoe and Donna Pryor, and unfortunately a couple of other folks. Elizabeth, Sampat, and Rena, whose last name escapes me. It was a great panel on basically, like, on online harassment and how to combat it, and I highly recommend people checking that out. I think it might be available in the GDC vault. But, one of the things that is kind of hard for me to internalize, and I'm still struggling with it, is that just because you haven't had it as bad as XYZ person, doesn't mean that it's not harming you, and therefore that it's not important. So, I'm obviously still trying to work through that, and it's kind of hard for me to, hear it's like, oh, you're so brave, and I'm like, I'm brave. Shit!
I think that GDC panel is the one where Randy Harper's online abuse prevention initiative was announced.
Yes.
And that is something she's doing with Alex Lifshitz and Zoe Quinn of Crash Override, who were previously on this podcast, as well as Sherry Rubin.
Yes.
Awesome.
That was such a cool, monumental moment. And I love that the sort of attention turns... It's kind of funny, right? I was about to say, it's kind of funny that the attention now turns to what we can do to fix it. Because we've had so many people talk about, this is a problem, this is a problem, this is a problem, look at the shit I'm getting, look at the shit I'm getting, look at all the stuff I'm getting. And, you know, we found the need to sort of move past that. We're like, okay, we get it. How do we fix it? At the same time, I retweeted a post from somebody who, you know, was thanking a panel that I was on. I think it was in like 2010 or 2011 when I was a FragDoll cadet. I think it was like Nudes or GTFO about online harassment. It was at one PAX or another. I don't know if it was Easter Prime. And it was a panel that I was on, you know, and they were saying, you know, I saw this panel on online harassment, you know, and it inspired me, you know, I think, you know, blah, 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 you know, and that was cool. And I retweeted it. And then somebody replied in 2015, mind you, someone replied, I didn't know it was an issue. Like, what?
Seriously?
Where have you been?
Well, you know, in their defense, I did an episode of this podcast where I invited onto the show 4 people who enjoy games like Grand Theft Auto, Call of Duty, Xenoblade Chronicles, but who don't participate in online gaming culture. And I asked each of them, what is Gamergate and who is Anita Sarkeesian? And they had no idea.
Yeah, it makes sense. Like, you know, like, especially because, you know, obviously, like, I follow who I want to follow. You know, and I'm friends with who I want to friend on social media, and so obviously, you know, I'm gonna get all of that from the people that I hang out with online and offline. So it's kind of hard to sort of like think about it, like, oh yeah, you know, this is kind of our bubble, and then, you know, people know about our bubble because, you know, because we tell each other about our bubble, but it doesn't necessarily mean that everybody knows what's up. I still find it kind of funny, you know, when like every once in a while, it's not funny. But it's mildly amusing. It's also kind of exhausting. You know, I'll have members of my dissertation committee, you know, link me to an article like, hey, have you heard about this Gamergate thing? And I'm like, yeah. Yeah. I kind of hear about it every day. It'd be nice to not have to talk about it
ever again.
Anymore. Yeah. You know? And I was like, and I really hope that you don't ask me about it, because where do I begin? That's the weird thing about Gamergate, right? It's like you'll have people that are doing like awful shit, and then, you know, you might have some people that are just, that they're not doing awful shit, but they're just like grossly misguided. And it's like you can be angry with them, but then it's also kind of like a bless your heart kind of moment. And this is kind of like a weird. This isn't an example of optimism, but it is kind of a funky example. Like I stream when I can on Monday nights the upcoming Rocksmith DLC that gets released on Tuesdays. They give me an early code and I preview it for people with my husband, and it's a fun time is had by all. One of my subscribers is apparently a self-professed Gamergater, and he is in my chat every week, hasn't necessarily unsubscribed to me. Like, he, you know, and then, like, he will, like, recently say that, like, you know, things like, you know, like, oh, man, it's a shame, you know, that Elisa is an SJW. And I'm like, hey, I'm a social justice fire mage. Get it right. First off. Second off, I was like, yeah, I believe in diverse games, and I believe in better games, and I believe that, you know, people shouldn't be sexist or homophobic or transphobic or racist, and that's, you know, that's not censorship. That's just being a decent fucking human being. And you are not being silenced. We just want things to be better. and more. And he kept watching the stream. Like, like he still hung out, because and I'm like, and he knows this about me, like he knows this from my tweets. He knows that's who I am. I seriously, clearly I'm studying gender and music games, and I don't hide the fact that I'm a feminist. In fact, sometimes I've been known to wear a gaming's feminist Illuminati t-shirt. Like, and yet, even though, he thinks, even though he's like part of the like, even though he thinks like I'm an anti-GamerGater, it's like, no, I'm just, pro common damn sense. Even though, he's like, I'm all for civil rights. I'm just more moderate about it or whatever. Like even though he's like that, like he still hung out. And he still enjoyed my stream, and he's still a subscriber. Because at the end of the day, we both liked the same game. What? And we could bond over that. Like sometimes it legitimately makes my head hurt.
It is baffling. I have a YouTube channel with a few subscribers, and there was one time when I was getting some pretty hateful commentary. This came right after the Polygamer episode about toxic masculinity.
Oh,
right.
Fun.
Yeah.
Fun.
And one gentleman was being particularly hateful, and so I decided not only to block him, but to block his friends as well, because I didn't want to run in any of that company.
Of course.
And so I started to follow up on who he follows on Twitter, and I came across this one account that was delightful, and somebody posting, wonderful insights into so much of the media that I love to consume. And it became very apparent that this other Twitter user was not a GamerGater. And I'm like, why is the person who's harassing me following this person? So I blocked the guy who was harassing me, started following the Twitter account he was following, ended up having that person on this podcast, and we talked about how great games are and how we need more diverse games. I don't know if this GamerGater was just following people he wanted to troll, or if he actually did see something of value in what we're saying.
It's weird, right?
Yeah.
It's weird. And yes, like people, people just can't stand the idea that people that don't look like them might want to, A, be in the industry, and or B, want to, see stories where they themselves are the heroes. And the same people that will say, what about White History Month? And it's like, okay, you have millennia.
Right.
What about Men's History Month? Okay, you have the textbooks.
Right.
Literally all of them.
Right.
Like, what is it to, have more cool stories? Like, in what universe is it okay for you to be like, I am an orc with a magic staff that lives in the trees that also drop gumdrop fruit every 200 years. In what universe is it totally cool to say, yep, that's legit, and then, say, well, this character is the hero now, and also she's a lady, but then also, she's also struggling with motherhood. Well, now you've gone too far.
Well, Elisa, come on. First of all, that is not historically accurate. And second of all,
my God,
compared to orcs, women are really hard to animate.
Oh.
Cut us some slack.
This is where the part where I throw my laptop. But I'm not going to do it.
And this is why you're in Florida and I'm in Boston.
Oh.
But hey, let's talk about one of the greatest examples of video games bringing people together. Video games saved your marriage.
Yes!
You wrote all about it for Polygon.com. There will be a link in the show notes. But tell us all about how you are still happily married thanks to electronic entertainment.
Well, it's not just that.
Oh, this wasn't the only thing keeping you together?
There was more. No. He also happens to be like he's one of those like straight cisgendered white dudes.
Oh, the bad guy, right?
But he's also like okay despite all that.
Despite all that, he's worked against it. Wow, that's very generous of you.
I love it. He's also kind of cute, and he can cook, and he's also my guitar player. So without him, I'm kind of screwed. Until I learn how to play guitar, and then I'll be fine. Then I can finally ditch him. But we're also staying together for the cat. But there's also video games. He had this whole like Atari history, and eventually kind of gravitated to more like PC Counter-Strike type stuff. And then we know about my gamer history, Nintendo, SNES, but then I also gravitated to more of like RPG type stuff. So when we ended up moving in together, about a couple of months before we got married, he had a computer and I had a computer. We had a Wii at the time, and we would do like some couch co-op stuff with our friends. Like when our friends would come over, we play Mario Party, Mario Kart, and that was really cool. We'd play like I think at some point we had a GameCube very briefly, but it was a lot of like playing together as a band. And there might have been like a game or two that we would play together, but for the most part, it would be like me on one computer playing World of Warcraft, him on the other computer playing Counter-Strike, and we already didn't spend a lot of time together because he works nights and I had a 9 to 5, and so it was already kind of like two ships passing each other in the night kind of vibe. And so the time that we did have together wasn't necessarily the most, co-op friendly kind of time. So I was like, like we were still okay, and we were still fine, and we still, liked each other, he's cute, and I wanted to keep him around. But I was like, what would be really cool is if there was a game somehow that could, that we could both play that satisfied both of our sensibilities, because he's not a big fan of Magic, and I was, and I wasn't confident, playing first-person shooters. And so, we were looking up stuff, and then we found out about this game called Borderlands, which was a FPS RPG. And I said, well, that sounds like exactly the thing that we wanted. And so we popped it in, and we played it, and it was, this isn't hyperbole. It was kind of life-changing for us to be able to be in the same universe and work towards the same goal, but play things in a different way, and that was totally cool. We could still talk to each other and teach each other about stuff, and he would teach me basic techniques, like, reload under cover, and, don't shoot wildly, like maybe take like a second to like aim before you do that. Simple things that I just had no idea. And then he would be running by and like running and gunning and doing all this cool tactical stuff. Then I'd be like, hey, there's loot over there. And that dude dropped something. And you should probably go pick that up. And you should probably open those lockers and those mailboxes. And there's all sorts of really cool, useful stuff. And then this is how you do a skill tree. And you should think about where you put your points. And so all of those things put together made for an awesome experience, because we were two different people, but we were complementary people, and we were cooperative people, and that was awesome. And so from then on, we basically sought out experiences that would, help to kind of scratch that itch, and it helped make me a more confident gamer, so that I didn't feel like I was stuck anymore in RPG world. Like I said, hey, Battlefield, talk to me about Battlefield. And he said, well, it's actually pretty cool because, you can be an engineer and you get points for doing stuff other than killing people. And I said, yes, that is my vibe. And then so we could play that together. The funky thing that ended up happening is that not every game was split-screen co-op like Borderlands was. And that's how we initially played Borderlands, was just split-screen co-op. And I was like, well, if we want to play, there might be games that we want to play together, but we need 2 consoles and 2 TVs in order to do it. And thus, the setup was born.
The setup.
The setup. So now we have 2 Xboxes and 2 TVs and a Wii U and a 360 and a PC now, and it's pretty glorious. And it's not to say that we play everything together, we don't. But we seek out opportunities for us to play together, and there's more of that available to us now because we can learn from each other. And we can cooperate with each other, and that's really cool. So that's like an added activity that we can do together, and like we're still, learning things about each other, even, to this day, which is kind of cool. And that's, like sometimes, you think, oh my God, we've been together 14 years.
Oh,
We're
wow.
high school sweethearts.
Aww.
It's gross. It's gross. I know, I love it though. He's kind of cool. And I don't know, it's really cool because we're both independent people with our own likes and dislikes, but then when we have the opportunity to kind of show off our different skill sets in the same universe, it's a real treat. It's a treat. It's a date night. It's a date night. Like, one thing I didn't talk about in the article, so, exclusive to Polygamer. One sort of moment that I freaking loved is, so we were looking for more cooperative experiences, and one of our first major co-op experiences was when I went to interview first to see if I wanted to go to Lesley University in the first place for my master's. And so I flew up to Boston, Cambridge, and met at Lesley University, and it turns out that his band had a tour up the East Coast that ended in Boston. So I said, okay, this is perfect. So what ended up happening was his tour ended in Boston, I flew up to Boston, and then him and I drove back to Miami all the way down the East Coast. And it was such an awesome road trip. And the cool thing was he had a camper that had a little TV on it, and we hooked up the GameCube to it. And so we would park the camper at a campground that would have like an outlet. And so we'd plug in the GameCube, and the game that we played the entire way down, I think we ended up finishing it, was Gauntlet Dark Legacy. I was clearly a mage. I guess it would be a wizard, and he was a warrior, and we both needed food badly, and it was awesome. And that was a cool cooperative experience. And then the only other thing that we could think of that might be sort of close to that was Diablo, right? And so Diablo 3 came out, and Diablo 3 finally came out for the 360, and I had been already playing it on PC, but, I was playing it on Mac, but he wasn't really interested, and he was kind of hemming and hawing about it, but it finally comes out on console, and we had our 2 Xbox 360s at the time, and I come home from work one day, and I find a note on the door that says this sort of really long, kind of like eloquent thing about all of the different universes and worlds that we've explored together and all that stuff, and that he's excited to have one more adventure with me. So I take down the note, I open the door, and on both televisions, Diablo 3 is ready to go, pre-installed, loaded, my controller's on, he's sitting there waiting for me, and I was like, oh my God.
That is so sweet.
Marry me like 15 more times. That was awesome. It was so beautiful. And, and that's the kind of thing that we do now, it was just me being a dumb nerd and like going to a midnight release for the new World of Warcraft expansion, and he was there, and he was supportive, but now it's like, okay, we are in this together, and even when we're not playing the same game, like he plays Elite Dangerous, I have no interest in flying a spaceship, especially because he has a whole like HOTAS throttle joystick thing going on, and I'm like, you know what, that's all you do. But like he'll play that, and I'll play The Sims, or I'll play maybe even like a Telltale game. He'll play those, but I'll play some of that stuff, and like we'll still be kind of cooperating with each other, even though we're not necessarily into or playing the same game. It's like, I don't, it's not my world, but because you like it and I love you, I want to know more about the thing that's making you happy. And that's kind of what it's turned into now. And so this is why video games are awesome.
Could you ever see yourself being happy with somebody who is not a gamer?
If they were not a gamer, we would have to find, well, I mean, think about this. Like, we weren't, we kind of sort of like played video games, but we were never like super gamer. We never necessarily like considered ourselves gamers. So it would have to be like, the thing that put us together at first was music. And that's the thing that sort of, still keeps us together, is music on top of everything else. So if not a gamer, I don't know that it's weird. I could probably see myself as someone that isn't a gamer, but they would probably have to have something else that I could share with them. Like, maybe they didn't do video games, or maybe they did comic books, maybe they, like, they have to be like some sort of a geek, or at the very least, like, appreciate certain things. Like, I could definitely bond with somebody over sports, if there was somebody that wanted to be on the same fantasy football team as me, that would be cool. I want to be with somebody that is passionate about something, and that can explain to me why it is that they're passionate about it in a way that might potentially make it accessible, and that would give me the sort of same respect with the things that I love, I think is key. Not, I feel like I could like something, and there would be a lot of people that would say, wow, that's dumb, or like, that's fluff, or that's stupid. But I want to be with the kind of person that says instead, well, that's not my thing, but that's intriguing. Why is it that you like it? That's the kind of attitude that I like. And they also must like cats.
Of course. In some relationships, I've seen the attitude where if one person is really passionate about something and the other person isn't, that passion almost becomes like something that they're vying against for the main person's attention. Like, oh, you're playing video games instead of spending time with me?
Right.
Or, you are going for a long bike ride and I'm stuck here at home, and so...
Been there. How about this? I was, I've, been with this guy 14 years. Like, I've had that thing, he was practicing to get into his school, to get into the music school, and he had to, in order to do that, he had to practice guitar for hours and hours and hours and hours. And so the guitar became that for me. Like, oh, you have your fingers all over that. I'm sitting right over here. What the hell? I think the thing is to be your own person. That's one of the things that my mother always told me, and that I will always love that my mother taught me, was that you have to make sure that you're your own best friend first, and to be your own person, so that if that ends up happening and that person has a passion, and if that's a passion that you don't necessarily can get into, hopefully at the very least you can understand why it is that they like it, and hopefully you can find something that gives you that same rush. You don't have to share everything. It'd be nice if you could be at the very least compatible in the sense that you can understand. You don't necessarily feel like you have to be like forced to do everything the other person does, because then that's not a good time either. I mean, you can always try it. I tried paintball. Him and his brother were very into paintball for like a hot minute, and I said, well, they're going up to like Central and Northern Florida to do these like big weekend battles with, hundreds of other people, and, they're buying paint, and, they're doing all this stuff, and, I'm like, that is not my universe, and those paintball thingies probably hurt, and I'm not a fan of, like, pain and stuff, so I was like, nah, man, you go do your thing. But at some point, I said, well, I'm gonna try this. Because if it works out, then it's another opportunity for me to spend time with people that I love. And it's another cool thing to do with someone that I love.
And you never know what you might be missing.
Exactly. And you never know what you might be missing. Like, for example, I talk about this in the article, like Evan tried Skyrim. He's not a big RPG guy, and like Borderlands was kind of as far as we got. And he's not a big like magic. He's more sci-fi than fantasy. So you tell him warp drives and, let's take over this entire facility with a crowbar, he's all about it. You tell him that there is a fight between mages and Templars, and oh, by the way, there's also dragons, then he's like, I don't know. That's when he sort of like shuts off.
His eyes glaze over.
He's like, what now? And then there's different kinds of magic, and then there's like blood magic, but then there's like, what? So he's not. But I think the idea is to always have that mentality of, I like this person, and there's something about this, whatever this is, that is making the person I love happy. So let's try and figure out what that is, and if I can get into that, cool. But then if not, then I know what it is that makes them happy. And that's totally cool. Like, he played Skyrim, and then he basically killed an entire village worth of NPCs because he hit the wrong person, and then that just sort of started a chain reaction where everybody was after him, and then he just had it in his mind that he just needed to leave no witnesses behind, and so he killed the entire village. And I was horrified, and then he's like, I'm not going to play Skyrim ever again, and like, he's never going to play Dragon Age Inquisition. He's never going to play it. I know this to be true. But it doesn't mean that, he goes looking at me dealing magic and says, oh, that's dumb. Oh, that's stupid. Or when you're going to get off that stupid game and, like, watch SportsCenter with me. Actually, I'm the one who tells him to watch SportsCenter with me. If anything, his is more of a, oh, that's cool. What's the story? What's going on here? I don't know. It's having, like, a genuine interest in stuff. And like, how about this? Like, my passion is my academic work. I have a bachelor's, 2 masters, and hopefully soon a PhD. He got his bachelor's, and he's an owner of a small business. Like, academia is not his vibe, but, and then I've been stuck with this thing for the last 6 years of my life. And that could be something that could have potentially sort of torn us apart because, okay, you're going to school, and then if I'm at school, then, maybe I'm not necessarily like working as much, and then that could be like a serious source of tension. But the minute that instead of having the lens of this is something that's taking her away from me, you change that to this is something that's very important to her and I love her, therefore that should be something that could potentially be important for me to support, then that changes the game entirely. Like, he doesn't know like half the stuff that I talk about, but but I teach him, and he's learned so much in the last 6 years. He's amazing. He is quoting, Judith Butler, and he doesn't even know it. I have him doing all sorts of cool stuff. I've trained him well, but I don't know. It's cool. Like games are only one sort of facet. I feel I kind of pinch myself on the daily. Kind of won the lottery with this one. And it's kind of one of those where our vows were not, as long as you both shall live, it's as long as the love shall last. That's what our vows said. So it's like a constant process of communication and checking in with each other, to make sure that everything is still cool. Yeah. I know.
Speaking of facets and aspects, there was one comment you made in your Polygon article, which isn't strictly gaming related, it is rather personal, but I asked you off the air if it would be okay if it came up, and you said okay.
Yes.
You said your husband was there for you when you came out as bisexual to your parents. You've been with this gentleman for, you said, about 14 years?
Yep.
And so when was it that you came out to your parents?
So I must have been about 15 or 16. there was no sort of kind of one kind of aha moment I had to sort of discover it. It was more like finding myself attracted to, the girls in my high school and finding myself, doing things, hugging, maybe like sharing a kiss on a dare, as a joke. And then it turns out that I was like, oh, that didn't feel like a joke. That felt pretty awesome. I was like, I could probably, I can go with this. And then sort of realizing, and looking at people more as people, instead of like I'm attracted to, instead of thinking about me being attracted to men or me being attracted to women, I just thought, if this person has XYZ qualities and they're attractive to me, then it kind of doesn't matter. Sort of finding stuff like that out along the way. Jokingly, I mentioned that, there was this sort of like running gag about the sort of long-haired cuteness of the Hanson kids. Remember Hanson?
Vaguely, just vaguely.
Yeah, it's sort of, they were all cute and young and blonde and had long hair. And there was a sort of kind of, and I was attracted to a couple of them. I think it was like Taylor and Zach, I think, were the posters that I had on my walls. And there were these sort of running jokes, which, at the time, now looking back at them, I was like, oh, those are kind of like transphobic jokes in a sense, about the idea. I was like, oh, I can't tell if that's a boy or a girl. And then I had these pictures on my wall, and then I said, I was like, no, like, doesn't matter to me. This is an aesthetic that I like. It doesn't matter what they actually identify themselves as, sort of like really like tiny kind of amusing awakenings like that. And then I'd recently figured out that one of my half sisters, I believe, had come out. I wasn't sure if she had come out as bisexual or as a lesbian, but I believe one of the processes of her coming out was her introducing her girlfriend to my father, in a sort of, like, not literally, but like, she wrote him a letter and basically explained that, okay, this is my life now. And I said, oh, he seems to actually be handling this pretty well. And my half siblings were all, grown. These were all from my father's first marriage, and they were all, a lot older, in their 30s at this point. And they're like, okay, they're adults, and, this happened, and, he seemed to be taking it okay, so, well, all right, here goes. So I came out to my parents, I came out to my dad, because he was the only one involved in the conversation. My mom was just kind of just, like, sitting there and reading a magazine, and she probably wanted to pretend that it wasn't happening. And then, I sort of, like, really casually brought it up. I was like, hey, here's a hypothetical question. What if someone, like, really close to you was bisexual? I wouldn't care. They're a loved one. I don't care, I love the person, whatever. Like, what if, like, a close, like, blood felt, like, really close? really, really close. And then he said, are you feeling a little bisexual, honey? I think those were...
What a great way to put it.
Right? And I was sort of like taken aback by that, and I was like, well, I'm not, like I'm coming down with something. I was like, well, I'm not feeling, I am. And then I think he just sort of like brushed it off and was kind of like, I don't think you should be and this was sort of like his tack in general, and I was like 15, 16, which is, a whole other conversation about double, cultural double standards and all that stuff, but he basically didn't want me to make any decisions that were based on sex or sexuality until I was 18. And that was basically, the period at the end of that sentence. And it was kind of never brought up again, mainly because I didn't necessarily feel like I needed to broach that subject until I had an excuse to. And I figure I was like, well, let's burn this bridge when I actually, have a girlfriend or have a girl I want to bring home to mommy and daddy, which, as you can surmise, we are in a monogamous relationship, and thus, that never had the chance to happen. You know, he wasn't physically there for that, but he was there to kind of pick up any available pieces, and it was something that I kind of, you know, struggled with and discussed, but it was mostly with him and not necessarily with my parents thenceforth, which is why, you know, like experiences like Gone Home, to sort of bring it back for gaming, are things that are such important stories to have out there, because now that's something that I can point to and say, look, that is what it was like for me. Like, I can't make games. You know, I can't. I mean, I probably could. You know, someone inevitably is going to be saying, yes, you can. You can do anything. I may not ever make a game. I may not ever write a game. I may not ever write a novel or make a movie, but that's an experience that I can point to now and say, that experience, those feelings, that's kind of what it was like for me. And that's something that I can show people. And it was something that I was able to show Evan and have Evan play through, because then I can tell him, look, you know, this is a way for you to be able to experience what I felt like when I was 15, 16 years old. And, you know, I can explain it to him, but, you know, him being able to have that other kind of interactive experience was another sort of thing entirely. And that was kind of cool to have. But yeah.
Wow, thank you. It's really hard to be honest with other people about who you are. I know that there are parts of my life that I keep from my family because they wouldn't understand, and I don't necessarily feel that's important that they do, especially in my parents' advancing age. You know, I certainly don't want to do anything to upset them, but at the same time, that makes certain experiences and certain interactions very difficult, because you have to think about which aspects of my identity am I putting forward today, which parts of me am I allowed to be.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, and it's kind of, you know, it's sort of it is the double-edged privilege and curse of it's the privilege and bane of my existence as a bisexual woman in a monogamous relationship with a man, that I quote unquote get to hide that or not have to have people deal with that. But then that means that there's a part of me that is constantly erased and constantly never brought up, because it's almost like there's no excuse to, which is a shame. And that's, you know, and that's kind of the stuff that leads to a lot of the erasure that us bi folks experience, because it's like, well, you know, there's the idea that, like, I almost feel like I'm a traitor to my sexuality by engaging in a kind of like heteronormative, especially like monogamous marital relationship. You know, I'm engaging with all of this privilege, you know, and so I don't know. It's kind of it's a double-edged sword in that case.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many aspects to that I'm curious about, that we could do a whole podcast on that.
Yeah.
Maybe you should go on the Less Than or Equal podcast, because they talk about equality and diversity, whether or not it has anything to do with games.
Well, put me in touch with it. I will ramble just as much. I kind of want to apologize for talking your ear off for this long.
No, this has been wonderful. I'm just concerned about taking up your time, and because I still have two more things I want to talk to you about.
Oh.
And let's make sure we can find time for them. The first is something that we've been hinting at for the past 2 years, which is that you front for a band called Crimson.
Yes.
So you are the lead singer?
I am the lead singer of Crimson. And
this band was founded 6 years ago? You founded it?
Yep, just about. So it happened where I was kind of a singer-songwriter, except I didn't really play the guitar, so I had Evan do that for me. So we started off as kind of a duo, but it was all under my name, because I wrote all the lyrics and I wrote the melodies. And it was all under my name, but my name became increasingly harder to get people to pronounce correctly. And it became, rather than just a duo, I really like, I was a huge fan of Metallica and Poison and Queen, and I always knew that my songs needed chugging guitars and drums and all sorts of other cool things in my head. So I'm like, I need a band. Like, I like you, Evan, but I need a full band. And so I had a full band, but then, I was still rocking the, Elisa Meléndez, name on the flyer. And I was like, this is increasingly frustrating. Because, even in Miami, which you would think I wouldn't have too much of an issue with, but like the name wasn't getting pronounced right. And I felt like it was kind of disingenuous for me to have these people be a part of my creative process, but then have it all be under my name. I did the bulk of the work, but it became increasingly squicky for me to only go by my name when the guys were contributing so much more. So I was like, we need a band name. It's just going to be a lot easier. Then we don't have to answer a lot of questions, because then people were confused. It's like, they see Elisa Meléndez on the flyer and they thought it was just going to be me with an acoustic guitar singing about my feelings, and they're like, then there's this full angry rock band. What's going on? So screw it. We need a band name. And I guess by that point, my hair had kind of become a little bit of a signature. I didn't have as much red as I do now, but I did have a significant amount. It was like, it's got to be crimson. I don't know. What are some synonyms? Red? No, red's dumb. We need something cool. It was synonyms for red, and we looked up basically looked up a thesaurus kind of thing, to see okay, what other names for the word red, for the color red do we have? And I was like, ooh, crimson. Crimson sounds cool. It should be crimson something, and then somebody was like, well, it could just be crimson. I was like, all right, that works.
Perfect.
Yep. So we were Crimson, and we recorded a 5-song EP when we were, I think it was still, we recorded those first 5 songs, I think, still under the Elisa Meléndez tag. Those we are considering making public, probably for free, because I'm not a big fan of the quality of those initial recordings. I'm like, I've grown so much since then. But what we do have available is a 3-song EP featuring the songs Say Goodbye, Tarnished, and Don't Stop. Don't Stop is the one that is featured as an unlockable song on disc in Rocksmith 2014, which is kind of cool. So not only can you hear the song, but in Rocksmith 2014, you can actually learn how to play the song on guitar and bass, which is kind of awesome, and it is definitely a project that I'm personally undertaking. I like the idea that I can learn how to play my own songs. That's kind of cool.
Well, I gotta say that I went to the band's website, crimsonrockband.com, and you have a feature on your website which I normally don't approve of, which is it automatically started playing your music.
Oh god, I'm so sorry, I gotta fix that.
But this is a good thing, because I don't know if I would have taken the initiative to actually click play and your music started coming on. I'm like, oh, this is really good.
Oh, thank you.
And then it finished one song, and it went on to the next one in the playlist, and then the next one. I'm like, yeah, I dig this. I at no point had to reach for the stop or the pause button.
Oh, I wouldn't have blamed you if you did, but I appreciate that you didn't.
But, normally you play that game where you're like, which browser tab is that coming from so I can close it?
Oh.
And this was more like, what browser tab is that music coming from so I can get more of it?
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Sure.
Oh. Yeah, and I appreciate that, especially, on unfortunately, we had a couple, the bandmates that are featured on those particular recordings, 2 of them have moved away, have moved on to greener pastures, and are playing music elsewhere. So and our drummer has become increasingly popular, which is a great thing for him. But it's not as great for Crimson, because then that means he's him and Evan too. Evan is coming back from playing a gig with his blues band, actually. So if I can plug that, which is also a great band, jukepostblues.com. It's kind of a cool. They jokingly call themselves post blues, because it's blues, but it's way more aggressive and not as roots based, but there's also a harmonica in there. I don't know, it's really cool. But, all that to say that we haven't really been gigging out as much. We are wanting to get back in the studio and record 3 more songs.
So I have one more question for you.
Just one?
Just one. I'm sorry. I know.
Ew, have me back.
I'll do what I can. You'll be the first repeat guest.
No.
So, if somebody were to ask me to describe Elisa Meléndez, I would say she's a badass.
Christ.
And this podcast has done nothing to change my opinion of that.
No.
This was cemented even right after the PAX East panel. I'm like, she's a total badass. If you think about the variety and eclecticity of her skills and passions, and even just her aesthetic, total badass. But well, why are you saying no?
I don't know.
Is that a bad thing?
No, okay. No, that's a cool thing. I was like, oh, that's awesome.
Well, here's the thing. One of the purposes of this podcast is to help me identify biases that I may not even realize I have.
Oh.
And last year, when Captain America 2 came out, there were a ton of reviews of the film that consistently referred to Black Widow as a badass or kick-ass, or there's basically like a meta-study showing that although the film itself was not sexist, reviews of the film were, even when they were complimentary.
Ooh.
And when I think about that, I realize that I rarely refer to men as badass. So, am I being biased or sexist in some way when I think of you as badass?
That's so funny. I didn't think about it that way until you brought it up. There might be some, now that you bring that up, that's something that I would have totally been completely unconscious of. But now that you think about it, there might be a reason for that because, you think about dude kicking ass and then it's just expected. It's a superhero thing. It's like, yeah, okay, of course. This isn't a movie where you would expect people to sit everybody down over coffee and say, why is it that you would like to take over the world? Do you think you could not do that? Movies don't do that. You don't expect people to do that. You, however, probably expect women to do that. Not you. I mean, the royal you. You would expect, you don't expect women to literally go in guns blazing on something. You usually see women as either the the damsel in distress, or a prize to be won, or a barrier to progress. I'm kind of quoting Tracy Dietz, which actually looked at the different types of female characters in video games in 1998. But it's kind of true of a lot of media. Where women are either they're not there at all, which is usually the most common category. They're not there at all, or they're a damsel in distress, or they're a barrier to progress. So you very rarely see people women in a position where they are quote unquote kicking ass, because they're not necessarily generally expected to kick that much ass. Then the woman becomes the badass, whereas the guy is just doing his job. So that makes total sense. Sorry.
There may be a subconscious expectation that because you defy traditional gender stereotypes by being loud and outspoken, you are therefore a badass.
Potentially. I get, yeah.
Because just because I don't mean to be insulting doesn't mean that I'm not.
True, but that's the thing though. I don't know. I take it as a compliment, personally, because I have ridiculous imposter syndrome, so I don't think of myself as making any sort of dent at all. In fact, this is the first time that I want to say, this might be the first time someone has interviewed me on a podcast.
That can't be true.
I mean, I've been a part of a podcast. I've interviewed other people. People have talked to me after cons, and I've been on panels, and I've been part of, Q&A sessions as part of that. But I don't, this might be the very first. I don't know. Don't quote me on that. It might be, though. How about this? They're far between and few. Let's put it that way. They're far between and few because, one of the thoughts that came to my mind when you asked to sort of like interview me and I sort of scheduled this was like, what? Why?
And then I sent you the outline. You're like, oh, I can talk about this.
Yeah, and then it's like it takes me a minute. I'm trying to work on it, but it takes me a minute to try and figure out, like, oh, I guess I have said a lot of stuff, and I guess I have done some things. Cool. Yeah, I guess I could talk about that. And if people find that interesting, thumbs up. I just literally thumbs up right now. You can't see it, but my thumbs, my toe thumbs, my Megan Fox-esque toe thumbs are up. Both of them.
So people who do find you fascinating want to hear you talk about more things. Where can they find you?
Well, you can find me on the Twitters at Elisa Rockdoc. That is ElisaRockDoc. On the Twitters, and then that's pretty much, I like to keep, brand consistent, my brand. I like to keep my brand consistent. So you can find me as Elisa Rockdoc on Twitter. I also want to try and stream games a little bit more, so you can, so that's also my handle on Twitch, as well as YouTube. My YouTube site is very, very quiet, but I hope in the coming months to contribute more in the way of video content, even if it's just maybe highlights from streams and stuff. But Twitter is usually your best bet. If you want to read anything I've written in terms of a quote-unquote journalist or game critic capacity, you can find all of that stuff at elisameléndez.com. ElisaMeléndez.com.
Wow, wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Dr. To Be, Elisa Meléndez.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the vote of encouragement. Dr. To Be. It's sometimes hard to see the light at the end of the tunnel, but I dig it.
And where is that light at the end of the tunnel? What's the ETA?
So I was hoping to maybe see if I could get done before the end of the fall semester. But if not, then definitely by hook or by crook. Otherwise, I'm going to try to find some way to punish myself spring of 2016.
Excellent. So by the time I see you at PAX East 2016 on April 22nd, you'll be a doctor.
Hopefully. Cross all crossables. Let's do that. Cross all potential crossables, you out there in podcast land.
Wonderful. Well, I will look forward to seeing you there and hearing from you many times in between now and then.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. This was great.
Yay, I think so too.
This has been Polygamer, a Gamebits production. Find more episodes, read our blog, or send feedback at polygamer.net.